Well, we should have gone live. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm here in my home in the New Forest in the south of England. It's day one of lockdown 2.0 here in the UK. And I'm glad to say it's a sunny day. It's a beautiful day out there. And I'm going to talk to you about the maritime sector. And I'm going to talk to you about, I guess, what I think is one of the most complex and most critical subjects during the COVID crisis, and I'm going to talk to you about people. So what I'm going to attempt to do in a short space of time is give you an overview of what we're hearing, or what we hear is happening and what you're telling us is happening globally in maritime around hiring, recruitment and people. I'm going to go through that. I'm going to hand over to Kelsey Connolly, who is director of our ship management recruitment team. Kelsey is going to give you an update on what's happening around Seafarers and again talk to you about hiring, recruitment and people, but in the context of Seafarers. So we've got over 300 people on the webinar today, and I'm going to do my best to answer some of the big questions that are going to come up, some of the big themes that will come through. And I'll go through those at the end of the presentation. I probably won't get through everyone's questions for sure, because there'll be so many, but I'll do my best to give you an insight into some of the stuff that you're asking. Today, I'm not going to use any slides. I'm just going to talk you through what's happening. So you've got me on video for the next 20 minutes or so, and then over to Kelsey. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Charman. I'm the Group CEO of Faststream. I started Faststream roughly 22 years ago. We're now today about somewhere near 100 people, offices in the UK and quite a big office in Singapore. So in a normal year, to give you some context of kind of our helicopter view, if you like, of the maritime sector, we typically place between 800 and 1,000 people into jobs in the maritime sector. Most of that is shore-based people, but also seafarers as well. So I'm still very much a hands-on recruiter, but today I specialise in recruiting for senior executives and doing search work for maritime organisations all over the world. So I guess you guys out there fall into generally two groups of people who are taking part today. I suppose the first group we could describe you as potentially from a recruiter's perspective as candidates or people who are employed in the maritime sector. Perhaps you're worried about or thinking about your career during the crisis. You're thinking about how is this all going to impact you? And I'm going to do my best to share with you today what's happening and hopefully put your mind at rest in some instances. The second group of people taking part today are, I guess, broadly speaking, employers. You're thinking about your people, you're thinking about hiring, you're thinking about how to recruit the people to run your business, how do I hire these people in the middle of a pandemic? And also you probably want to know about what's happening in the wider maritime industry, if you like. So let's look first of all at how the pandemic is impacting candidates and how it's impacting people. And so I think the first thing perhaps to look at is the common thread in our lives at the moment is during the pandemic, change. And so change is kind of what we're all experiencing. Every morning we wake up and there's something changed, something on the news has happened, government have changed something, and so change is the common thread that we're experiencing during this period. And so much has changed. And if you think about the world of work and you think about whether you're a candidate or whether you're an employer, what's changed, so much has changed during this period. So, where we work, today, doing this from home and working from home, maritime as a sector is mostly still working from home. The maritime industry is being run from people's home offices, from their kitchens, from their back bedrooms and dining room tables. How we work has changed using Teams and Zoom and tools like this has been a big part of this. And for some of you, the actual work that you actually do has changed. perhaps you've had to change sectors during this period or change jobs during this period because you lost your job. Some of you have started new jobs and you've never met your colleagues, you've never set foot in the office, and that's been a real big change for many of you. And some of you have come from sectors like the cruise sector and the offshore sector, and what's changed is you have no work. You know, you might be unemployed and looking for a new job, and there is no bigger change in your life, or it's one of the biggest changes in your life when you're looking for a new job because you don't have one. And so what you're telling us is that you're making this, all of this is making you rethink your work, your life, and your careers. And in fact, in a recent survey, 1/3 of candidates tell us that they're rethinking their careers in light of COVID. Well, what does that mean, rethinking your careers because of COVID? Let's look at some of the themes that we're hearing and that you're telling us. So a lot of you are telling us that you want to work somewhere else. And so one of the big themes is that expatriates don't want to be expatriates anymore, and they want to come home. You know, we're hearing a lot of stories about life as an expatriate during lockdown, expatriate families who've been away from their families in their home countries, maybe for 7, 8, 9 months, maybe longer, since they've seen their home family, having kind of a tough existence in their expatriate locations during this period. You know, previously having the opportunity for kind of a sports and social life with other expatriate families in places like Singapore was a really important part of life as an expatriate family. Now kind of locked down in an apartment with no social life, potentially an unhappy spouse, potentially unhappy children, the whole expatriate lifestyle in many instances is losing its shine. Only in the last week, I was talking to someone about relocating to Singapore, and he said, Mark, you know, I've got lots of friends in Singapore already, and I won't consider a relocation to Singapore because my wife is hearing from her friends in Singapore that it's tough, there's no social life, there's no clubs, the children are very restricted on what they can do, and it just wouldn't work for us as a family. And so persuading people to relocate abroad is very difficult in this period. I'm working a couple of searches right now in Asia, and I'm finding it very hard to persuade people to consider international relocation. People are telling us that they don't want to commute into big cities. So this is unsurprising, I guess, given what we're experiencing right now. But people are telling us that actually when COVID is over, that they kind of rethought their lifestyle, rethought their work-life balance, and actually no longer want to commute into big cities. And this whole working from home post-COVID is still a big topic. And it's a hot topic when you talk to candidates, and it's a hot topic when you talk to companies about what they'll do post-COVID and how they'll make that work. Obviously, the maritime sector, we're all used to jumping on aeroplanes every month, sometimes more frequently, a lot of travel associated with the maritime sector. And quite a lot of the people that we talk to are telling us that actually, I'm not sure that I want to go back to doing all of that travel that I was doing before COVID, post-COVID. You know, I've got time with my family, I get to sleep in my own bed at night, I'm not living out of a hotel room. I'm not sure that I actually want to go back to that. Of course, in the media during this period, we're reading a lot about this divide between potentially older people and younger people around how they view COVID. And we're experiencing that with job seekers in the same way as well. So, you know, younger candidates are telling us that they don't want to work from home. They want to go to an office. They have a social life at work. They want to have a social life at work and after work. They're happier to relocate, and they have a more relaxed view of the COVID crisis. Older candidates are telling us that they really do not want to commute. Again, unsurprisingly, they don't want to be on public transport, and they're looking for jobs that will allow them to work from home, and have enjoyed working from home during this period and see that as being the future. So, of course, We're all frustrated during this period, and our frustrations manifest themselves in lots of different ways. But again, in the context of job seekers and talking to candidates and talking to people out there in the maritime sector, some people feel very frustrated that as a result of the COVID crisis that they've had to put their careers on pause. A lot of companies, of course, are hunkered down in the bunker during this period, not doing much. They're just trying to survive the crisis and make it out the other side. And they're finding it difficult even to meet the promises that they've made to their employees before COVID around promotions and career progression in some instances, and that's tough. Tough for the companies and tough for the employees as well. But you've got things like pay rises on hold, and you've got bonuses that are on hold as well. And all of this is impacting how people feel about work. And a lot of people are saying that they want to move forward, they want career progression, and they feel frustrated in their current roles. So to share an interesting statistic with you from a recent survey that we ran, increasingly we're using data and kind of snapshot surveys on things like LinkedIn and other platforms to give us an insight into candidate behaviour. And a recent survey that we ran on LinkedIn told us that 57% of people tell us that they will still be looking to change jobs in the next 12 months. So a big number of people still looking to change jobs, irrespective of the COVID crisis, and looking to do that over the next 12-month period. Of these people, 53% of these people are in commercial functions, and 57% of these people are in technical and operational functions. So not really a big divide between commercial and technical. Big number still, equal split between Asia and EMEA, in so much as that in Singapore and in Asia, again, we're seeing the same sort of number of people who say they want to change jobs over the next 12-month period. So something else that we're seeing during this period is job seekers are behaving differently. So for example, they're asking a lot more questions and they're doing a lot more homework on a prospective company that they might look to join. I think there's an element here of they don't want to be kind of, as we said, out of the frying pan and into the fire. They're worried about job security if they move jobs. They don't want to be kind of moving jobs and then getting made redundant, or losing their job shortly afterwards. And so they're very cautious. We see senior executives looking for repatriation clauses in their contracts, and we see senior executives trying to negotiate termination bonuses built into their contracts as well. I think the other big trend that we're seeing at the moment in this sector is we're seeing a lot more what I'd call window shopping or tire kicking, as you might say. So this is people who really like the idea of changing jobs, but they won't commit. So they like the idea more than the reality, or maybe they're just not finding the right opportunity for them. But I think there's a lot more window shopping going on by candidates who think the grass is greener and they're having a look to see what's out there. But when it comes to the crunch, they won't commit to changing jobs. So those are some of the big themes of what we see employees or candidates doing during this period. Let's have a look at what employers are telling us, what are companies telling us, and how are they behaving during this period. Well, I'm going to hit you first of all, I guess, with quite a big worrying statistic, but again, maybe not unsurprising to many of you out there, which is that companies are telling us, you're telling us, that pay will remain static for the next 12-month period. So 77% of companies tell us that they do not plan to increase pay over the next 12-month period. Out of that group, 89% of commercial leaders said that in commercial functions in the maritime sector that they thought that pay would be static, and 64% of technical leaders said static pay would be the same in their sectors for the next 12 months. And I guess the difference there between technical leaders and commercial leaders is that the technical side had experienced more skill shortages, and it had been harder to recruit technical people than perhaps it had been some of the commercial functions. We looked at Singapore versus, or APAC versus EMEA, and there was no regional difference. This was pretty much identical across Asia as it was across Europe. So we took a look back at previous surveys and previous data over the last few years, and it would seem that in the maritime sector that pay will be static for a 3-year period. So 3 years for the sector as a whole, where really there hasn't been a great deal of confidence in increasing pay during that period. And I think that reflects perhaps some of the tough times the maritime sector has been through. And so the impact of this is going to be that we'll see more people changing jobs just simply to get a pay rise. You know, I can change jobs just to earn more money, or I have to change jobs, or I need to change jobs to earn more money. That it will be, of course, you know, harder to attract new talent. Potentially we'll see people leaving the maritime sector to join other sectors, and it will be difficult for the sector to attract people from outside of maritime into the maritime sector in the first place. It's going to be hard for the sector to bring people in. So another interesting statistic is 46% of companies tell us that they plan to make new hires in the next 12 months. So 46% of companies tell us that they plan to make new hires in the next 12 months. So quite an encouraging statistic, quite an optimistic viewpoint of the maritime sector, that companies feel confident enough that they're going to commit to making hires over the next 12-month period. In our experience, vacancy numbers generally in the maritime sector have held up okay. If you run a recruitment business or you own a recruitment business, it's an important statistic looking at the number of new vacancies. And of course, that's something we track carefully. For us as an organisation across everything that we do in the maritime space, we typically record about 3,500 new vacancies globally in the maritime sector. So a big number of new vacancies. For us, what we've seen in the second half of the year is a big pickup in new vacancies. There's been a big increase in new vacancies, especially over the last 4-month period, and we've seen double the number of new vacancies in this period compared to the previous period. Dare I say it, we've even seen the odd cruise vacancy come through over the last month or so, and the cruise sector, as we know, has been hit horribly during this period, but you know, we've seen the odd vacancy come through. Most companies who you talk to now, they're pretty comfortable with remote recruitment and onboarding. They've got it down to to a pretty good process now to recruit people using tools like Teams and onboard those people as well. And companies are telling us that in the new year and from January that they expect to increase hiring because they want to get ahead of the curve for the new year and start to bring people into their organisations. So what's driving the current hiring? Well, it's what I call the 3 R's. So the 3 R's are restructuring, reshaping and replacing. So organisations are restructuring, they're looking at how they're organised. Businesses, organisations are looking at the makeup of teams and the people they have in the teams, and do they have the right people in the right seats? And so looking at reshaping, and then replacing. So they're replacing people who have left or who haven't worked out during this period for whatever reason and who they've let go. Based on the search work that I personally get involved with, I would say there's a 4th R that needs to be added in here, and that R is reinvention. Lots of businesses are kind of looking in the mirror right now, and they're kind of reinventing themselves, how to prosper during and particularly coming out of COVID, and thinking about that and thinking about reinventing themselves and the people they need, and that's driving some different sort of hiring that we've not seen before. So companies increasingly, when they're hiring, we're seeing are looking for flexibility. And so during this period, for example, we've recorded double the number of contract vacancies. So these are, short-term or medium-term contract vacancies than we would normally see during this period. And I think this is a reflection of companies being uncertain about the future. I think it's also companies who've made redundancies and are sensitive to be seen to be hiring during this period. And also specific projects where they need a specific skill set to come in and run a project, but also senior executives coming into businesses on an interim basis. And so an element of this, I think, is driven by companies being cautious. And I think an element of this, because of that caution, is companies kind of wanting to try before they buy, if you like. So what else do we see happening? Well, with remote working now kind of the new norm, if you like, some companies are starting to think about and look at the potential of how they might benefit from this, and access or have access to a global talent pool. There are some very skill short areas in shipping, so technical shipping, especially in Northern Europe, hiring technical superintendents, hiring technical people, very difficult, very skill short area. Organizations that perhaps would hire from their local talent pool or rely on relocation, they found it quite difficult to recruit. And of course, we know that relocation is expensive. We know that relocating people is risky. It doesn't always work out. In the current world in which we live, relocation is increasingly difficult with things like Brexit, work permit difficulties in Singapore, and some of the other challenges generally around relocating people. It's not easy to get it right. So now with well-established remote working, companies have access to a global talent pool, potentially working from home, that they couldn't previously access. And so it's going to raise, I think, some interesting questions around what impact will this have on the maritime sector? What impact will this have on the global shipping hubs? Will businesses need to sit people in expensive offices in expensive cities like, Singapore and London and Copenhagen? Or will they move to a more flexible model where they perhaps have people who are working remotely or working from home? Is there some way that this will shape out differently? I think my prediction here is that a hybrid model will evolve, and it will be a combination of remote working, travel. We will travel a lot normally in the maritime sector, and then time either working in the main offices or time working in kind of regional hub locations that are there to facilitate, teamwork and people coming together. So this is starting to throw up some really interesting discussions around global pay strategies. And so companies are starting to ask themselves what I think are some quite difficult questions. And, things like, well, are we going to pay people the same wherever they're sat? So for example, will a technical superintendent who's working from home in, Manila, for example, get paid the same as a technical superintendent sat working in an office in Singapore or in London or wherever it might be? Is there going to be equality of pay irrespective of where people are based? Or will companies see this as an advantage to potentially lower their cost base through paying people who are working remotely less? I don't know. Will companies still pay London weighting? And this exists in other cities around the world as well, which is essentially an allowance or a cost of living allowance for working in London because of the increased cost of living. And so because of the remote working piece, and people who were working in London who are now working remotely, will they still get paid a London weighting allowance, which can be, many thousands of pounds? And I guess one of the other big questions here is this the final nail in the coffin for expensive expatriate contracts that include schooling and housing and all the bells and whistles? And will this finally be the nail in the coffin for expatriate contracts? So there's a bit of a flavour of an overview of what's happening in the wider maritime sector and what employers are doing. On that note, I'm going to hand over to Kelsey Connolly, and Kelsey is going to walk you through what's happening with Seafarers, some of the recruitment and people trends around Seafarers, Kelsey's one of our senior directors, looks after recruitment for the ship management sector, which includes the Seafarer recruitment piece. So I'm going to hand over to Kelsey.
Good afternoon all, and thank you very much for the introduction, Mark. For those of you who don't know me, I am the director of Faststream's ship management business, and my team and I specialise in supporting the ship owner and the ship manager across their commercial, technical ship management and crewing functions. I've been asked today to share with you all a bit of a snapshot of what our clients and candidates are doing. And I must admit, I actually found this to be quite a challenge because our crewing teams recruit in so many subsectors, from the passenger markets encompassing cruise, super yachts and ferries, right to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, looking at tankers, for instance, and everything in between. So I've summarised the key market recruitment trends that we are hearing and we are seeing from our clients today. So it would be remiss of me not to mention that 2020 has brought about many challenges for the shipping community, but arguably one of the most significant impacts of COVID-19 has been on that of our seafarers. The IMO today estimates that nearly 400,000 seafarers from around the globe are still stranded on ships. And whilst this is a vast improvement from the peak of the summer months, ship managers and owners still face significant challenges currently and in the months ahead. So, what does the market look like for a qualified and experienced seafarer today? This is very much a tale of two halves. In 2017, Faststream placed a captain aboard one of the world's largest luxury cruise liners. Today, the same captain is now working for Waitrose, a luxury British supermarket chain, as a delivery driver. Now, this is a rather drastic example, but it is the cold, hard reality of what we are seeing for many qualified and experienced seafarers today who are unable to transfer their skill sets into more buoyant maritime markets. Now, as Mark mentioned, undisputedly, the cruise sector has been one of the hardest hit by the pandemic. And thankfully, many candidates have been able to transition into the world of super yachts and ferries. But this is still a significant oversupply of these candidates in the market, needing to find new employment opportunities outside the world of shipping. And as my cruise candidate proved, this is still very much an issue for all of these seafarers. However, it is not all doom and gloom. On the flip side, we have seen significant spikes in the demand in other sectors, most notably the tanker sector. So alongside this, we also see significant skill shortages, in particular within LNG and with LPG experienced officers being the most in demand. Looking at ranks, second engineers and chief officer vacancies are by far the most critical of these and top the charts as our most requested rank to recruit for within the seafaring recruitment team. Now, this is not a new trend for us at Faststream because gas experienced candidates have been long sought after, but our vacancy numbers are substantially up compared to this time last year. So speaking to our clients, we have gained some insight as to why this is. Firstly, extended periods of time at sea and the mass accrual of holidays of seafarers is piling up, and this is putting significant pressure on crew rotas. Seafarers do not want to get stuck back on board, and they are standing their ground by not voluntarily extending rotations. Whereas previously there may have been a bit more flexibility from the seafarer to cover sickness and to also cover their equivalents back to back, there is hesitancy to do this in the current climate. Secondly, to add to this pressure, we have the perennial turkey season effect. Now, as one of my clients rather aptly nicknamed it, this is referring to the period between October through to December, as Christmas is a notoriously difficult and tricky time to onboard seafarers, especially new starters, as candidates are opting to spend the festive period at home with their family. Thirdly, travel restrictions have also influenced how clients are making hiring decisions. Owners and managers in some instances have had no choice but to hire candidates in country and recruit within a very limited pool of candidates who can physically mobilise to the vessel and on board. We had one client in the summer in Australia who needed a resident Australian master within a 24-hour turnaround time. Unfortunately, the master got COVID-19 and without having a master on board, they were obviously unable to sail the ship. In addition to this, the master needed to be based in Queensland because Australia's borders, all of its regional borders are closed at this stage. So without this critical hire, the ship would not have sailed and would have incurred significant costs and losses. So thankfully, the stars did align and the right candidate was sourced. But this is a really good example of clients needing to fish in increasingly small ponds of candidates to be able to fill key critical roles. Finally, we saw a shift in the summer where European candidates were in really high demand, while most of Asia was stuck in severe and very strict lockdowns. Now, with Europe well and truly into its second wave of COVID-19, I predict that the demand for in-country hiring will shoot up again in the short term and in the coming months. So, in the more buoyant shipping markets, the ship owner, the ship manager have had to respond really rapidly over the last 9 months to ensure that they keep ships sailing. And that means keeping the talent that they have, but also attracting new talent to plug the gaps. So, as Mark mentioned, we've seen wage levels remain relatively stable in crewing as well. Clients have now had to look for creative new ways to attract talent and to retain talent. The biggest shift that Faststream has seen is with bonuses for seafarers. Now, this could be a signing on bonus to attract a new experienced seafarer from a competitor in the form of a golden handshake, or in as a long tour bonus, for instance, where existing employees are choosing to stay on board longer. So clients of ours who have historically not offered this are now doing so. And if you are not, then candidates are looking elsewhere where they can get this. So finally, this takes me on to how candidates are behaving and how responsive they are in the job markets. Ordinarily, candidates in time of economic uncertainty will generally do one thing, and that is nothing. They bunker down, they weather the storm, and then they reassess their options once the storm has blown over. We have not seen this happen in more buoyant shipping sectors, including super yachts, tankers, and to some extent, some offshore markets. We have also not seen a dip in application numbers, which represents active candidates looking for new employment in the market. But most notably, passive candidates, being those who are happily employed, who are not active job seekers, they also remain open and responsive to new opportunities. Over 3/4 of the placements that Faststream Seafaring recruitment team make come from passive candidate sources. And this is evidence that candidates are remaining fluid despite the pandemic. So job security and job confidence in these markets is evident. Faststream are still making placements on board tankers, actually more than this time compared to last year, and indeed with other sectors, including super yachts. And this is evidence that candidates really have the appetite to continue to change jobs during uncertain times. So, to conclude, as always in the world of shipping, some markets are thriving, whilst others are just about surviving. There is a significant oversupply of candidates in sectors, including cruise and offshore supply, and in others, there are significant skill shortages. Now, where skill shortages exist, the candidate is king. And this continues to put pressure on the ship owner and the ship manager to find new ways to become and to remain an employer of choice. So, that concludes my crewing overview. Thank you to all of those who have submitted questions. I'm going to answer a few of those before passing you back to Mark. So if you bear with me one moment, I shall pull up the first question. Okay. First question being, for seagoing roles, which roles skills is there long-term increasing demand from employers? Okay, so I've spoken quite a bit here about LNG and LPG skill shortages, and that will continue to be skill short in the coming years. But I would say Mark mentioned that we are receiving some cruise vacancies. We are, and all of these vacancies in cruise have been in a medical field on board. So this is where we see skill shortages persisting as cruises start to sail again into the spring of next year. So this is doctors, this is nurses, these are professionals on board who can give the consumer, the customer, confidence that they can sail on cruise ships in the future. I would say definitely that would be our top long-term skill shortage that we foresee, especially going into next year. And then second question, how can the shipping industry make it attractive to Generation Z, where their expectations and demands make seafaring an unattractive option for young graduates? Okay, so what we know as a fact is that what makes previous generations happy and what makes the current generation and future generations happy is very, very different. I think the key thing here is that pay is a given. Having competitive remuneration is key, and it's a given to Generation Z. I think the focus needs to be more on the additional benefits. So these benefits include home comforts, access to Wi-Fi, which, let's face it, for previous generations of seafarers has been a luxury. To attract younger generations into the seafaring community, these are all going to be things which are absolute essential and critical to be able to attract younger talents. We see employers of choice offering interactive platforms for feedback and suggestions on how to improve life on board, but that is critical. I would say on this point as well, a trend that we've seen over the course of the last 10, 20 years at Faststream is that the average age of seafarers looking to transition from ship to shore is much younger. We're seeing individuals who are working their way up to second engineer or chief officer not wanting to progress any further, and in their mid-30s, early 30s, wanting to transition to a life shore-based. So it just shows you not only will we have a problem whereby the average seafarer will be younger, but they'll be wanting to transition to shore much younger as well. So that's it from me. I'm going to pass you back over to Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. Appreciate you going through and doing that for me and giving a bit of an update on what we see happening around seafarers. Some interesting insights there, and I think it's fair to say that the world of seafarers has been very high profile during the COVID crisis and crew changes and the difficulties around that. It's been very high profile, but it was interesting to get Kelsey's insight into some of the other issues that we're hearing about. So thank you very much for everyone. Thank you very much to everyone for all of your questions. There's been some great questions, really appreciate it. And I'm going to try and pick up on some of the themes of the questions that have been asked today. One of the big themes, or a lot of questions, have been about people staying relevant in the current crisis and how to stay relevant in the future. So one of the questions that has come up a number of times, how do shore-based professionals in the maritime sector stay relevant for the future? Well, I think that the old adage of job security comes from being employable rather than employed has never been more true. The key to staying relevant is I think, staying current. You've got to keep reinventing yourself. Businesses are reinventing themselves all the time, and you've got to do the same thing too. You've got to stay curious, borrow ideas from both inside and outside the maritime sector, that the sector as a whole and companies are borrowing ideas increasingly from other sectors, and you've got to do the same thing. And you've got to keep learning and developing. You've got to invest in yourself. A really good example of that is, I wonder how many of you out there are managers and responsible for managing people. And then I wonder how many of you have taken time to kind of upskill yourselves on how to manage people remotely, given that we're now all managing people in teams via technology like Teams and Zoom. How many of you have invested in yourselves to do that? And then I think it's fair to say Maritime is entering a new era of data and technology, and it's moving quickly, and it's really important that you keep up. So it's all about, I think, staying current and therefore staying employable because you stay current. There's been a lot of questions around how to remotely onboard new employees and embed them into your culture and into your way as a business without ever meeting the team. And I think the first thing is that the best we see here is we see companies who are investing time into their new employees and who have a plan and have taken time to set out a plan around how to do this. And so this is organisations taking time to share their vision and what their mission is with these new employees who come on board as part of the onboarding process. I guess walking the new hires through values and their culture, which to me broadly translates as kind of this is how we do things here, and talking through the new employees around how they do things in their organisation. But also we see organisations doing it best where they recognise the importance of deliberately over communicating, both kind of top down but also bottom up, and also then between team members, and taking the time to make sure they promote this extra communication between the team members to make sure that people who are working remotely don't feel isolated and they do feel part of the team. And we've seen some good examples of companies doing a good job around this kind of over communication piece and getting people up to speed remotely. There's quite a lot of questions around Brexit that have come up and the impact on hiring people from outside of the UK. Well, before the pandemic, I think it's fair to say Brexit was the hot topic. It's not so much now. Now COVID's the hot topic, unfortunately, and COVID is what's shaping people's views, both employers and employees, as I've highlighted and Kelsey's highlighted today. Brexit isn't going to make it any easier to hire people in the UK or potentially in Europe. But I guess the silver lining of the current crisis, if it's possible to find one, is that the more future-focused companies will grasp with both hands the opportunity to kind of employ people remotely in hard-to-hire sort of sectors of the maritime industry, and having these remote workers who might be sat somewhere else in Europe or sat somewhere else in the world is a potential opportunity that's new to the sector as a whole. And so perhaps, maybe Brexit will be a challenge, but actually having people remote will overcome that. And then finally, there's been some questions around attracting and retaining young people to the maritime sector. The upside is that most of maritime is carried on business as usual, and compared to some sectors, it's okay, we've endured, and there's still opportunities out there for young people and new entrants to the industry. The downside is that, as we talked about, pay is static in the sector, and it's going to make it hard to compete with other sectors for young people in the first place. It's not going to make it any easier. The current crisis has impacted people across all sectors, but particularly the current crisis has impacted people who are at the beginning and the end of their careers. People in this kind of 18 to 25-year-old bracket are some of the people who've been most impacted by the crisis and unfortunately have lost their jobs. And so companies are very cautious at the moment about hiring, for example, graduates, people with no work experience, having them working remotely. These people obviously need a lot of hand-holding, they need a lot of training, a lot of coaching, a lot of guidance, and companies are pretty cautious about hiring these graduate level people, these new entrants into the industry, and being able to give them the remote development that they need. So we're pretty much out of time here, and we'll try and pick up on some of these questions that have come up that are very specific offline. I'd like to sort of share with you some conclusions, but I think it's very difficult to share any firm conclusions from any of this. Things are changing so fast. It's very difficult to have any firm conclusions around the world of work right now because things are moving so quickly. everyone here, governments, companies, us people, we've never been here before, and we're kind of all making it up as we go along. And so it's a very fluid situation, and we're adapting to this, and companies are adapting. But, you know, one thing is for sure, whatever happens, we are in a period of incredible change, and companies and people and the shipping sector, the maritime sector, will adapt. We will endure just like we always have, and come through this and come out the other side. And so I think that, you know, no firm conclusions. I think that we can see there's a lot of change going on, but let's see how this plays out. And I'll come back in the spring and give a bit of an update, I don't know, March, April time around what I see happening then. And hopefully we'll be talking on a more positive note, and we will be coming out the other side of this. So I'd just like to say thank you for taking part today. I hope if you're in the audience sat at the back, you're still awake, and you found this useful and productive. And yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.